anyway, what I'm interested in is to consider some of the games you guys have played. So, Greg, what games with percent or with a flat distribution do you know?
Okay, all of this reminds me a French game, which is called Indominus Satanis Magna Veritas.
With the famous die 666.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
And you have to roll on what is called. I didn't play this game. I think I was 16, so I have to remind. Mm-hmm. But I'm checking. You had what I think it was called the unique table, multiple table, something like that. And I found this table. I can paste it in the chat, maybe. So there's no color, but it's in French, but it's still readable.
That's okay. Uh-huh.
Okay, I just pasted it. And so I'm comparing. So that is, well, it's a D60. So basically, you have a characteristic from 1 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the GM sets a difficulty, which is the left column. So it's in French, but you can understand it. It's to very difficult, normal, and easy. And on the row, you have to check your characteristics. So if you have 3, for instance, do you see the table?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
So here, I'm going to roll. You say you have a 3.
Yeah.
Let's say the Game Master sets a difficulty. So name a difficulty.
Let's see, it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And you have 3.
Yeah. So here I go. So, how many dice?
Yeah, you roll 3 dice, but only the 2 first ones are important.
Right. Okay. So I roll those 2 dice, and I have a 7, or 3 and a 4.
You have a 3 and a 4.
Right.
So you have a 34.
Okay. That's right. I forgot about that. Uh-huh.
Which is less than the 43 on the table.
Right.
So it's a success.
Okay. Now then you roll the other die 6.
Yeah, and the last die 6 is the degree of success.
Right, correct. So that's my 4. I got a 4 on that.
So so actually there's no table for this. Right. And you just improvise. Yeah, right. 4 it's good.
Right. So the important point about this, first of all, this game Indominus involves angels and demons, and the fact that you roll 3 dice 6.
Yeah.
And you don't add them up right that. But it's a joke. 666, right? The number of the beast. So anyway, though the point here is kind of interesting. We're really not doing much besides rolling 2 dice 6 for the classic 2 dice 6 distribution. And then you, with your attribute value and your difficulty value, those actually operate as modifiers to move you on and off the hump of the 2 dice 6 bell. That's really all that's happening.
Maybe they took it from Marvel, but they told. I remember it's really memories here, but I remember the text talks about column shift.
Right.
It's basically part of the text.
Right.
You can shift your column. Maybe there are talents that can make you that.
Right. Well, that's another interesting point. We can talk about modifiers which affect your roll, which is mainly what I've been talking about. But we can also talk about modifiers like talents or something that say whatever you roll, bump it up. Right? Because I talked about that with column shifts before. There's reasons why you have a column shift. Certain things will affect your roll, which is what Lorenzo is doing, right, with his modifiers. Or like the modifiers in Champions of the maneuvers you just made. the opponent and the defender, whatever maneuvers they just made creates a unique modifier for this next roll. Or you can talk about once you get an effect, it goes up. Now, in a lot of these games, the latter, having something that affects the result, is a much more advantageous situation. Sean, in playing good old school D&D, of which I will call Advanced Dungeons and Dragons of the late 70s, the first 3 hardbacks.
Right.
In that game, what do you want? A modifier which gives you a bonus to hit, or a modifier which gives you, say, double damage?
I would say you would want a modifier that gives you double damage.
Absolutely. Because a +1 to hit doesn't really change from you much, right? Remember, no matter where you are. But that double damage, that's like hitting them twice. And in a game like that, where attrition on hit points is huge, basically you just got 2 turns. With one hit,
and it's interesting how the rolls, I really just thought about this, but the way that they handle armor class in that, depending on what armor you're wearing and what shield you're wearing, that's really a modifier on that, because some armors make
there's a table. There's a table they never use in play that I never saw used in play. But there's a table in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons which juxtaposes almost every weapon with almost every armor.
Yeah.
And then there's modifiers there. But as I say, I always saw it ignored. I'm sure there's someone out there who follows it assiduously, but I never met anyone who did that.
Well, there was this one time where we followed it assiduously. But not every time, for sure.
So the next... and I believe that went away entirely with 3rd edition and forward.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're driving at here is the notion of how so many systems really aren't all that different. You've got the shape of your curve. You've got modifiers which bump you along it, which, given the shape, may be very important or very unimportant. You've got also your degrees of effect, like in Undiscovered, right? You hit, well, now you roll your dice and see what the effect is. That's the classic Dungeons and Dragons situation. Or also the fantasy trip situation. You roll to hit, and then you roll to see how much it is. And we've talked before about how that can be quite tricky. So, like, for example, in RuneQuest, what you're really angling for is that impale, because just hitting really isn't all that great. The damage roll isn't going to do much. You really want that impale, because that's where you're going to get your double damage. And if you get an impale plus a critical, which is even the subset, then that means that it ignores armor. So you're really driving for those. So with all of this in mind, what do we see in, well, let's keep going. Sean, what's a system that comes to mind that, and I don't care if it's got a bell or if it's a flat distribution, but you have produced, yes, the unspoken member of this conversation. Here I am talking about champions, GURPS, Dungeons and Dragons, and then we jump up into the 90s and we forgot Rollmaster, didn't we?
Right. Yeah, we did. And it's interesting to me because it has a flat line of success. 75 is what you want, or at least, and in the new Against the Dark Master, which is, I guess, a retro clone of that. 75 is what you want, and it's roll high, open ended. Well, some rolls are open ended, some rolls are not open ended, but that's neither here nor there.
Remember, we're only sticking with hitting someone with a weapon right now. That's our only
And so that's an open-ended roll. You roll your dice, your 2 dice, and you add modifiers, and the higher the roll, the better. But unlike, so it doesn't really matter. Your skill adds to your roll, but your skill isn't really a hindrance. Like in RuneQuest, where you're rolling, trying to get your skill or less. In RuneQuest, you just add your skill to the end of the roll to get as high a result as possible.
Oh, you mean in Rollmaster, right?
I'm sorry, Rollmaster. Yes.
Right. So
right,
you roll, you add your skill to the roll, and you see whether you get the 75 or not.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And if you get your 75, you succeeded.
Now, well, remember that we shouldn't get distracted by algebra, right? I mean, you can put a number plus your roll, and then compare that to a shifting number. In other words, you can flip all these things around the equal signs all you want. So what you're really talking about, in my opinion, is that you've got a roll, and you've got, well, it's pretty straight. It's very transparent. You've got a roll. Then you add that a number that you know, and then you see whether you get a certain value or not. You could do the algebra so that you would still end up trying to roll a value or under, right? I mean, you could just flip the numbers around, and that's okay. A lot of things that call themselves different mechanics are really just algebraic rearrangements, right? Or certain other trips. There's, for example, feng shui. You have roll 2d6, one's positive and one's negative, and then you get your value based on that. And then you go to their little chart and see how you did. But, and I think can't remember, but I think you add your value to that, right? Your number. But do you understand that it's still just a 2d6 roll? And so the fact that you do the plus and minus really doesn't mean anything. You could have just added them together and changed the values, shift all the values on the table up, and you'd have all these same effects. So it's kind of right.
The only difference for Rollmaster is that you always, regardless of your skill, you always have a 25% chance to succeed. Because you get a 76 or above, you're good.
Right. Right. So with this going on, I wanted to focus though on the fact that you've got you aren't making a bell out of it, right? That's the interesting thing. You're just shifting horizontally per unit, right, of being better. If I've got a 55% chance, or it's a skill of however much, and I roll and I get my 75%. Now, by the way, just out of curiosity, you talked about it being open-ended. Does that mean if you get 100 or higher, you get to go roll on another table in Darkmaster?
I believe that is the case. Yes,
because that was one of the beloved features of Rollmaster, or aggravating, depending on who you talk to. Is that
right? So 100 or over, is what you're really looking for. Over 100. Right. 75 just gets you in the door.
Right.
The 100 plus gets you to potentially to another chart where somebody's face melts off.
Now, in terms of the range of the skills and the values that you're bringing to it, therefore, clearly 75% or above is mastery. Right. I mean,
right.
And I don't know if you can get up there. I don't remember in Rollmaster how that system does that, or where you get. I remember playing it a lot, and believe me, our percentages were not in that range. I believe they were somewhat lower, generally. But here's my question, and my remembrance, is that the flatness of the distribution in Rollmaster had a tendency to, again, create a sense of arbitrariness. Yes, it's true that if you took the same skill and rolled it over and over and over again, the person with a higher percent would succeed more often than the person without. But the chances, how am I going to put it? maybe it was just the fact that we never could quite grasp how to narrate failure in that game. And we just kicked, this was back in the 80s, and we always just kicked back to some stupid misfortune or some stupid incompetence. You know, and so that it's one of those games. I actually think of Rollmaster as one of those games where I really don't know what failure of a roll fictionally means.